Hello and welcome to the 16th 2020 NHL Draft Recap here at Scouching. Today we're looking at the Tampa Bay Lightning, and I would say their day overall was a mixed bag. Leading the way at 57th overall, they took Jack Finley. Now, I watched Jack Finley play a lot because I was really impressed with Adam Beckman's progression from last season, and Jack Finley was a player who I felt was a little bit more of a passenger to Adam Beckman's success from the times that I watched him play, but he is a big player with some interesting offensive tools, but is more of a defense-first center. I think he's an interesting pickup at some point in the NHL draft, but at 57th overall, that felt like a bit of a reach to me. And just looking at his point totals, I think masks what really goes on when Jack Finley's on the ice. I think he could be a good fourth-line defensive center in that Brian Boyle-style mold, especially with the skill that he does have, but I never really came away thinking that this was a player that I would have drafted in the top 2 rounds of this year's draft. 4th or 5th round, sure, I could see it. You can develop with the size and work on his strength and try to develop some offensive skill out of him, but I really feel like this was a pick where you're kind of aiming a little bit low. At 62nd overall, though, they took Gage Gonsalves, who I thought was a perfectly reasonable case for an undrafted player from last year to be picked this year, but again, at 62, it felt like a bit of a reach. He's a crafty, offensive, creative playmaking center, but I just felt that there wasn't much of a needle mover that really warranted picking him over some of the names that were left. He's a decent enough player. I think for a player that was undrafted last year, he showed enough to warrant a draft pick. Maybe he could be something, and I'm certainly not in a place to judge the defending Stanley Cup champions, but we'll just have to wait and see what happens with Gonsalves over the next few years. It might have been a bit of a reach, but I can absolutely see a world where he could work out as a creative offensive center. At 85th overall, though, I thought Tampa made a really good pick in Maxim Groshev. He's an aggressive player, he plays hard, he plays in the KHL full-time, and when he's deep in the offensive zone, he actually drives offense pretty well. If he can develop some skill to go along with the motor and skating talent that he has, I think he could be an interesting two-way impact player here and might be the one guy that I would put money on to play in the NHL from this draft crop. He went to the World Juniors this year, Rodion Amirov did not. I liked how he played at the World Juniors this year. They sent him out and just said, go out there and hit guys and just free the puck up. And he did that pretty effectively. And if you can do that effectively at the NHL level, which I think Groshev might be able to do, you've got yourself a pretty solid 3rd round pick. So I really liked that pick for the Tampa Bay Lightning for sure. At 93, they took Jack Thompson, and I definitely like Jack Thompson's skill from what I saw of the Sudbury Wolves, but I don't have a ton of data that paints him as a tremendously positive overall player. I didn't really like his skating, but he does have some interesting skill for a blue liner, especially from stepping up from the blue line, and there might be something you can work with here, but again, at 93, might have been a bit rich for me. But beyond that, at 116th, they took Eamon Powell, who I've really liked. I think he's a pretty smart, cerebral, skilled defenseman. He shoots right, which is something everyone is looking for, and if he can just refine his gap control and defensive rushes and just play a more well-refined defensive game overall, I think there's a really smart pass-first puck-moving defenseman here. It's an interesting swing to take. I thought he fell further than he should have, and between him and Groshev, those might be some interesting depth options for the Lightning down the road. At 147th, they drafted Jaden Giroux. Now, Giroux's not a player I've seen a tremendous amount of, even though I tracked Seth Jarvis this year. From what I've seen since the draft, he seems like a fine offensively skilled player, if not one that I would have picked this high in the draft. You can't really complain about 147th overall. I didn't really see much of a needle mover. I don't think it's that huge of a swing for the fences here, but he is an interesting, skilled offensive player who produced and has a history of producing in the past. So I'm curious to see how his game projects on a very strong Portland Winterhawks team for this season. And I guess at this slot, you take who you like and you see what happens. The Lightning then went out and drafted Nick Capone at 157. And for the Tri-City Storm, this was a guy that I didn't really see much that I really liked out of him. He's a big winger with some interesting play around the net. He works hard and plays hard. But again, I'm just not sure where his game is going to go from here. He's a December 2001 kid who kind of struggled to produce at the USHL level this year. So we'll see. I guess there's not much you can say about this pick here. I didn't really see much of a needle mover. The Tampa Bay Lightning then drafted a goaltender in Amir Miftakov. This is a goaltender who's been undrafted twice now, likely mostly due to his size. Now, I've seen Miftakov play quite a bit. He's athletic and a ton of fun to watch, and I'm glad someone finally took the swing on him. I did think that there were some goalies that were his age, like Dmitry Nikolaev, that might have been worth a swing in this range, that might be a little bit more projectable, but Miftakov is certainly a capable goaltender at his level in the Russian leagues, and I think he could be an interesting project to work on. A lot of people have been a fan of this goaltender for a few years now, and I'll be curious to see where his game goes from here. And with the Mr. Irrelevant pick at the tail end of the 2020 draft, the Tampa Bay Lightning took Declan McDonald. I've seen McDonald play a little bit with the Kitchener Rangers this year, and I don't really have enough in my tank to really say a whole lot about his game. It's the 7th round, the last pick in the draft. I'm glad he got picked because that might have been a very stressful experience waiting 216 names and then finally seeing your name go literally dead last. But I trust Rachel Dory's opinion on this when we brought him up in the draft. He's a fine option at this range, a perfectly reasonable player to take in this range, and we'll have to see what happens. So for the Tampa Bay Lightning, I can't help but give them a 3F. I think they left a lot of potential value on the board here, but they might have ended up with some solid role-playing options. I mean, Jack Finley has the size and defense-first intelligence to at least play as an NHL player one day, maybe as a fourth-line guy, but I just felt there wasn't a lot of upside to that pick. Gonsalves is a little further along in his development, and he did have a really good year, and I know there were people who were big fans of his game. I just felt that at 62, that was also a bit of a reach. I do like the Groshev pick, I really like the Eamon Powell pick, but guys like Jack Thompson, Jaden Dureau, Nick Capone, and Declan McDonald are guys. And again, I'll be happy to be wrong about any number of these players over the next few years, but I look at this draft crop as they are now and what talents they have and where they lack some talent in other areas, and I just feel like the Lightning might have aimed a little bit low here, and there's a very large inconsistency with the level of talent from pick to pick in terms of the value that they had in those slots. But they're the team that just won the Stanley Cup, so they must be doing something right. I wouldn't be surprised if they ended up with at least some decent NHL role players out of this NHL draft, but as always, the question will be, what did they leave on the board when they made the picks for the guys that they just wanted? So that's all for the 16th 2020 recap. I hope you enjoyed. If you liked it, you can click all the buttons you see below me so you never miss another one. If you really liked it, you could subscribe on YouTube by clicking join below or by signing up on Patreon. You'll get early access to videos, written reports for all Scouching reports, as well as plenty of other goodies that you can check out. Or you can pick up some merchandise from the Scouchwear shop, where 50% of profits go to the Women's Sports Foundation. So that's all, and we'll see you in the next one where we look at the Minnesota Wild.